Welcome everyone to Cornell Keynotes. We are so pleased to once again have Lauren Chambliss back in studio with us today to discuss the art, the science, and the craft and the discipline behind creating a compelling personal narrative. Lauren, welcome once again to eCornell Studios. Lovely to have you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really happy to be here
Yeah.
talking about something I love.
I know. It's been fun preparing for this with you for sure. Well, it's great to have you as a guest. We have lots to cover, but before we begin, I want to talk to our viewers for just a moment. Lauren and I want you all to be part of the conversation here. We've prepared a bunch of questions. We're kind of ready to go, but we are very interested in where our audiences are at. We're going to take your questions throughout. So if you do have questions, please drop them in the chat. I'll get them here on the iPad. Also, in a moment, we will display a QR code and ask for you all to participate. So get your phones geared up and ready for QR code action. Now, if you find what we're discussing here today compelling or it's useful to you personally or professionally, if you have aspirations to become a more effective writer, I will advise you to check out Lauren's online certificate programs from Cornell University. Lauren, what are these programs called?
So the first one, which is the one that might be most applicable today, is narrative and creative nonfiction writing. And that's a certificate course that I created with Professor David Wolf. And then the second one is content writing, which is a little bit more media focused. The first one is more in line with what we're talking about today, which is creative nonfiction writing.
Perfect, good. Well, we're going to share those URLs with our audience so they can check them out.
Thanks.
After we're through today. So what we have seen for students at these programs is that not only do students emerge as stronger writers from these programs, but you also get recognized with a Cornell credential that comes with program completion. So again, heads up for those URLs. Let's get started. We've got our first question for the audience, and that is, what kind of writing are you hoping to excel at? Some examples might be persuasive writing, narrative form writing, reporting, marketing, even technical writing, what have you. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of pretty healthy mix here. What we're seeing so far is this is kind of interesting. I wasn't sure what to expect exactly, but persuasive. Overwhelmingly, people are here to learn how to persuade, to influence decision-making, policy, whatever it may be. Technical writing, pretty well represented. Marketing, I suspected we would do okay there. Yeah, so that's kind of the way that the prompt was set up. Technical writing, reporting, great. We've got a really healthy mix of people from, sounds like all kinds of different industries here. Is this what you're used to?
Well, I'm surprised to see persuasive writing being so being something that's important to a lot of people, but it fits with narrative because what we know about narrative writing, especially personal narrative, is that it helps persuade people to do something or to think the way you think or to at least get your point across. And it's one of the most effective ways is to personalize the argument or the persuasive thing that you're trying to do, the action or the thought or the belief that you're trying to get people to agree, to align with you on. So it totally fits.
Perfect.
Everything else in there, I see it: reporting, marketing, storytelling, creative nonfiction. All those these days are part of the personal narrative genre.
Perfect, good. It feels like we have the right people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
you're a professor emerita. You worked at the Department of Communication at the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell, which is a national leader in the study of communication as social science. It's ranked among the top 5 from the National Research Council. So you now hold communication and writing trainings and programs. Tell us a little bit more about your background, who you teach, how do you like to do it?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, I came from this department. I'm part of this Department of Communication, which was absolutely fantastic for me because the faculty in the department really study how we communicate, both the systems and the processes, and then what goes on between us as individuals when we're having discussions or we're tweeting, or I'm sorry, texting, or we're thinking about whether or not we should listen to someone about a healthcare directive. So the department has done just voluminous research that's absolutely fascinating, that covers all aspects of how we communicate. And given that it is a primarily fundamental human, foundational thing that we do, being in this department has given me research backing or an understanding of the science in the part that I'm involved in, which is the application. the application of communication skills, the application of writing to persuade, to compel, to reach an audience beyond ourselves. So it's been a marriage for me, which was a perfect mix of my professional background, which has been mostly professional writing, and then understanding and learning about the sound research that is informing us about how best to do it. So it's been fantastic. And now I consult with nonprofits, and I also help people who want to bring some sort of writing to publication, like I do personal editing projects, and I consult with companies that are startups that want to figure out how best to message what they do to reach a broader audience, especially if they're in some kind of technical or environmental or a field where there's complex information to be digested. So that's my background, and personal narrative is among my favorite genres to talk about because it can be incorporated into, and often is now, into absolutely everything.
Storytelling, nothing new under the sun. It's been around forever. But as a discipline, as an endeavor, something that people are striving to learn how to do, storytelling's been a buzzwordy kind of thing for the last couple of years now. There's the ubiquity of online influencers. We have memoirs, memoir writers. So this seems like an emergent thing that's been happening over the last 10 years. Is this something that what's the historical case been? Storytelling doesn't feel like it was a thing 2 decades ago.
Yeah, in communication, it wasn't. You were
Right.
just starting to hear about the value of storytelling. And now, as you've said, it's absolutely everywhere.
Yep.
Like one of my favorite examples is if you look at a Subaru commercial, they're not telling you about the seat comfort or the strong engine or the kind of techniques or the technical aspects of the car. They're selling you a story about how it will make you feel, what the lifestyle is.
Get out there and do things.
You're right. Get out there and do things. Have your dog, have your kids safe,
Sure.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely everywhere. And it's also in the influencer marketing realm too, because in order for you to convince someone that you're important to follow, you have to have some authenticity, right? That's the thing that people relate to. When we do research, we find out the reason that people follow this influencer or that influencer is because they think they're authentic. They're telling the truth. And that's, or at least they're authentic in what they present. And that is based on storytelling. That's how we show our authenticity. That's how we show our personality. That's how we make ourselves more relatable. So there's been an explosion, both because research shows that we remember stories much more than we remember facts. If I tell you a bunch of facts and also tell you a story with it, 2 years from now, you won't remember a single fact I said, but you might well remember the story if it was evocative, if we had a shared value that made you relate to it. And there's just voluminous research that shows this. So that's why we're seeing the explosion in everything from advertising to people writing memoirs on Substack, to sharing personal aspects of themselves. And then the last thing I would say is because of the environment we're in, the social media environment, people are more used to sharing personal details about their life, right? In a public way, in a way that maybe when I was growing up was not nearly so common. So the leap from doing something in a post or online and then taking it into a larger memoir or an essay that you want to share with a broader audience about something that's happened in your life it's not that large a stretch.
As we're going to do through this conversation, I want to dip in and out of process. I want to understand what your recommendations are for thinking about the big picture, right? This is high level. I'm about to embark on a new endeavor. I have a new project. How do you conceive of it? How's a healthy way to conceive of it from start to finish, right? Conception to delivering the product.
Right. This is a great question, and I think it's a little different than if I was advising about a media project. For instance, you're writing a press release or an event release or starting a marketing campaign. The narrative might be much shorter. Like you might use a narrative to get into one of those more expository, what we call expository, which means fact-based communications. But you largely would probably sit down, write an outline, have your main idea, have an anecdote that you might use, a personal anecdote, and then get to the main points that you want to get to. So you would have an outline and then go from that outline. That's pretty much standard for media writing, any kind of media writing, whether it's articles, press release, events, announcements, that kind of thing, newsletters. But if you're writing a more personal, longer story, like a narrative, then I tell people, I advise people after reading thousands and thousands of these over the years in my role as a professor at Cornell University, to not get stuck on the outline. To first think about, what is your idea? Why do you want to tell this story? It's a story personal to you, but it's something fresh that hasn't been heard before. Because it is your story, it's unique. And what is it that other people will relate to? What is the hook? What's the main reason you're telling the story? This is the part that is the real, what takes the most time, and that's largely a thinking process. So once you get that identified, well, I'm telling this story because it illustrates this fundamental truth about being human in a different way, then the best thing to do, I think, is just to sit down and write down all your ideas, all the personal experiences, or the one culminating event. Sometimes it's one big event that happened that is what you want to write about. Sometimes it's a series of events that led up to a new understanding or something happening. So get down everything that you think might want to go into it, like all the stuff you think might feed it that would be interesting, any descriptive details or anecdotes or details that you want to bring in. And then write your first draft. Like, don't worry too much about having a defined structure when you first start. We're going to talk more about structure later, like how you can bring structure to the story, because that is an important element. You don't want it just to be a stream of consciousness. No one will want to read it. But the first thing is just to get your thoughts down on paper, and then you can begin to work with it to bring in the creative elements that will bring it alive and make it most compelling to someone other than your family and friends.
So as you're writing, you know, I would imagine throughout you're using it. I hope so. Thinking about it critically, what you're doing, and thinking about, am I being compelling? Is this relating to people? Any ways to think about that? Because, you know, like you said, that stream of consciousness approach or the expository approach isn't going to cut it.
Right.
How do you think about making your draft or your writing compelling?
Right. So after I get that draft done, or after I advise people to at least get a rough draft outline of what they want, I think the most important things are to go back and look at a possible story arc. And I think we might talk a little bit more about story arcs at some point. But you need a scaffolding on which to hang your story so it doesn't just read like either a chronology or a stream of consciousness. And that can help then shape it into something that will be both recognizable to your audience, even if they don't immediately aren't conscious of it. It'll be an arc that they can follow easily. And also, it just helps you focus your writing. So you can figure out, oh, this now doesn't fit there since I'm using this kind of a story arc. When by story arc, I mean your storyline, like the way, the scaffolding on which you hold the story and how it progresses through the chain of events or the points that you want to make. So getting a structure really helps. That helps make something compelling and readable, easily readable for your readers. The second thing is to borrow from what we would call creative writing, which I don't really like that separation between creative and non-creative, but just because everyone knows what I'm talking about. You know, borrowing from poetry and from novels and from short stories and some of the more easier ones to integrate that will make your personal narrative really sing. Because you could have the best story in the world, but if you write it in a boring, pedantic fashion or an academic or too formal of a fashion, it's not going to be interesting. So the writing aspect of it is critical. And there are quite a few techniques that you can use to spice up writing. You don't have to be Toni Morrison or John Irving or a famous novelist to be able to input some creative writing elements to make a story really sing. And a lot of that you can do after the first draft. You could go back and input some of these things.
Let me ask you if you think this would be useful. I know that in movies, in films, there's something called the log line, right? Or in writing, there's the lead or the byline, whatever. A one sentence sort of summary that may help you determine or think about it whether what you're doing is actually compelling. Like,
Yeah.
going back to,
Yeah.
do you think about it this way? Do you think about, sure, an outline's cool, but wouldn't it be great if there were a one sentence thing?
Absolutely. And that's like when I'm talking about getting the idea of what it's about, you should be able to explain that
Yes.
to your aunt at dinner.
Yes.
This is what my novel or my essay or not my novel, sorry, my memoir or my personal essay or my essay exploring something that I'm going to use my personal experience is about.
You had mentioned in our pregame huddle that writing personal narratives requires us to be vulnerable, to be open, to search inside, and to some of us that might feel like maybe overexposure, writing in a way that we haven't done before. But you say this is absolutely critical. Tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, I'd throw that question back on you. Like, do you ever think about writing personal narrative, and then do you kind of get stuck there a little bit?
No, I'm not driven to do that, but I think I probably would get stuck a little bit. Yeah. What do you want to reveal, right? There's a lot going on inside.
Yeah. So I do think for some people it's easier. It's like for some young people today who communicate a lot about their feelings and their emotions and the things happening in their lives, it's not as great a leap to go into writing a personal narrative. But for someone like me, who, as a professional, did not divulge myself in my writing, even hopefully when people read my journalism, they couldn't tell whether I was pro or con a particular story, right? The idea was that I maintained a neutrality as much as possible when writing. And that line's blurry now because most people are at least a lot of writing today is people are very clear about their opinions and who they are, and maybe you even know some background details about them. So the leap may not be so much. But if you're considering writing about something that's very highly personal, the main thing that's most important is that it's true. So that means if you need to expose something that might be difficult or personally embarrassing or offend other people, like other family or friend members might get upset with you, I think, have to decide to take that risk if you're going to do it. And you see that all the time in memoir writing now, where a memoir will come out and the siblings of whoever wrote the memoir will say, it didn't happen that way, our parents weren't that cruel to us, or I didn't do what she said I did, or he said I did. And so there is an aspect of putting yourself out there and being subject to criticism. We know in today's world you obviously could be, and probably would be in the social media sphere. But I think you have to be willing to do that and to develop a tough enough skin to take it. Like to just expect that you might get some backlash and to know that that's an important part, that it's important enough for you to get the story out. And for some people, a lot of personal narrative they write just for family and friends, but they still want it to be good enough so somebody will read it and actually enjoy it and not go, oh my gosh, I have to read this because Cousin Jane gave it to me.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different audiences, but if you want to write personal narrative, you should want to write something that's publishable, meaning you need to be honest.
All right, perfect. Good advice. Audience, you were so on top of the last question we asked. I thought we'd take a little off ramp here and ask you a question here, right? So, audience, what is your greatest shortcoming as a personal narrative writer? I see maybe one person tendency to use cliches. That's endless pitfalls there. While we're waiting for that to populate, let's talk about you. What would you consider your shortcomings or challenges as a writer?
Yeah, this is a great thing to know, Chris, because as I talked about editing being a really important process in personal essay writing, even more important perhaps than in other things. I know that one of the things I do, probably my most common pitfall, is to what I call overwrite. I will put everything in. too much detail, too many metaphor, too many similes, too many alliterations, too many parallelisms, all the little
But
creative
you're
writing.
drawing from all your
Yes,
greatest talents.
yes, right. All the things that I think that I'm good at.
Yeah.
I will do too much of it,
Okay.
and it ends up cluttered and it doesn't flow well.
Mm.
But of course, I try to think about that while I'm writing. But the easier thing for me is not to get stuck on it, but to just let myself write that first draft and then to go back and say, okay, I know this is one of my main things, so let me check for it. And I would say, as I said, having read literally thousands of personal essays, one of the ones that is a really easy one to go back and fix for that a lot of people suffer from is either is boring words like you'll say I discovered instead of something that's a little more evocative, like it was revealed, or the surprise. You can find language that's more urgent and evocative. And it's also not varying sentence length. So you'll look at a paragraph and see that every paragraph's the same length. And particularly in online media, that is an absolute killer because our eye doesn't read the words. It just starts going like that, back and forth across the lines, and we get bored, even if it's interesting. So varying sentence length is something I always check for when I edit. And I'm pretty good at that when I'm writing. But as I said, I have a great tendency to overwrite. I love to mix metaphors. I'll have a metaphor about the deep sea, and then 2 seconds later, I'm talking about fire. And it's like, oh, wait, clean that up. So this is at least for me it's an important self-knowledge tool. Do you have something you watch out for?
I do. Mine's not as compelling or interesting as yours, but I think sometimes I have difficulty sort of conceiving of the thing and having structure, and that feels like a hang up when I first get going. I'm having a hard time, envisioning point A to B because I don't think linearly all the time, and so that's one of my particular challenge. But I want to go back to what you were just talking, if you don't mind. The idea of overwriting. Not necessarily that it's overwrought, the writing itself, but that you're in a state, you're in a flow state, you're letting it go. That must be something you encourage when it comes to writing to some degree, right?
I absolutely do, especially in this personal narrative form.
Yeah.
And I see from the answers here that people have typed in, the two big things are over-detailed and being concise yet impactful. And those two things are aligned, right? Yep. What you're being over-detailed, which is when everything just flows out and you get way too much in, let it. That's my advice to people. Instead of getting hung up and saying, oh, I'm going on too long, just let it flow the first time. You can be over-detailed, but then go back and with a really critical eye, edit out what you don't need. And that's how you get to being concise but impactful, right?
Yes.
Because hopefully when you do that, you've maintained the parts that really have oomph, the parts that really will evocatively connect with your audience, but you've gotten rid of maybe some of the description that just went on a little bit long and might have distracted from the scene. Like if I'm describing this room and as part of setting of a plot, I don't need to talk about every single thing here, but I might mention the cameras if there's something about being visible that is connected to my plot, right? So those are the kinds of decisions that you make when you go back and look at what you've written. At first, I might put everything down, and then I go, oh my gosh, I can use that camera image because that's what this story is about. It's about being visible. So that's the kind of thing that I think if you get everything on paper, you have, or type, however you do it, then you can go back and refine the parts and help with that storyline and story arc.
It can be super fun going from that additive to subtractive mindset too. Like editing is as creative as anything too. Creating spaces. And
It really is.
Super fun stuff. Speaking of editing, so let's go back to mechanics here. Editing is a critical phase. It's kind of ongoing. Some of us stumble through it or don't have methodologies or frameworks to do it, but you've got a regimented process to recommend. There's 5 steps. What's the deal?
Yeah, I do. I practice a process myself, and I've taught it for years because, and it's not just me, this is how professional editors mostly edit. And after you get comfortable with this process, then they do begin to blend together. You don't have to think of them in quite such separate buckets. But to start, it's really helpful if the first thing you do is go through content. You read for content. You read your whole thing, read it out loud to yourself, because if you do that, you're going to find the places where it bogs down, it's too long, it gets boring, or the places where maybe you jumped from one thing to another and you don't have enough detail. Reading out loud is absolutely fantastic for both content, overall content, and structure. So when you're looking at content, you look, is there something in here that doesn't need to be in here, that doesn't support the main points I'm trying to make, even though it might be a really cool little story, side story? And you look at, is there enough here? Does, what's working in terms of the content and what's not? The next thing is structure. And that's how you structured the piece. Does it logically flow? Does it work? Is one paragraph here out of place? Does it need to go higher because it explains something? Is it more or less flowing from piece to piece? This is also where you look at your transitions. Like, right, am I making transitions from paragraph to paragraph, from section to section in a way that is logical to the reader and doesn't have them wondering what's going on, right? The third one is line editing. This is where you go back and you look for word choice and you vary your sentence length and you see if you've got active verbs and you look to see if you can use some cool alliteration to start. Maybe you've got two C words together and you go, oh, I could easily put 4 in this sentence and it would have a really nice cadence. And this is also where you start to feel the flow of the piece, like line by line, is it working? And you fix sentences that are awkward. And that my point is, I wouldn't worry about fixing awkward sentences in the very beginning when I'm doing the content. I do it at this point.
Yeah.
And then the next one is copy proofing. After you've done line editing, you should have a really good piece. You think, wow, this is in good shape. I'm in good shape. And then you just then you copy edit for mistakes. And that's just, I wrote bear instead of bear. I spelled it wrong. I have it's instead of IT''s, things like that. AI is great for this. It can go through your piece and find in 2 seconds sentences where you may have grammatical mistakes, or you might consider breaking a long sentence into 2. The thing to be careful here is not to let it rewrite your voice. You might want to let it change a few of your sentences to make them more understandable, but don't let them do it all. If it changes everything it wants to, it's going to remove your voice. So it's a very helpful tool, and will cut your time down considerably, but don't take every recommendation that it makes unless it is actually a grammar issue.
Right. It's designed to make you sound average.
Yeah, it's designed to make you sound average. So it will moderate your voice. Don't put too much of it in.
So we've just gone through, we've considered the 5-step editing process. All the while, we should be thinking about the structure of the personal narrative, beginning to end. How do you talk about how to develop that? How to make it actually work? What makes it click?
Yeah. So the thing I talk about in personal narrative and that I found really helps people when writing is after they've got their idea for their story and they've jotted down their ideas and maybe have a draft and have done a first edit, or maybe even before the first edit, is to look for a narrative arc that will fit the story content. And what we mean by narrative arc is the way in which the story is shaped that helps the reader move through the material. And when I talk about arcs, that probably doesn't mean much to you, but when I explain what a couple are, you'll immediately go, oh, I recognize that. So the reason arcs are helpful is because it's kind of behind the scenes. It's like the metadata, like the reader doesn't actually see it, but it helps them get through the material in a way that's understandable, right? Like they automatically kind of know what's going to come next. So here's a perfect example. The Mountain is one. You can think about every television show that is in a half-an-hour block, right? Starts out with something's happening, and then the tension mounts, it climbs up the mountain, it gets higher and higher until you get to the peak, you have the climax, and then the last few minutes of the show are just the tail at the end where all the pieces are wrapped up or you cast forward. That's a very common personal narrative framework. You're working your way up to this moment of an aha or an event or something happening that dramatically changes things for you, and then the tale at the end about what's been the result of it. Another really common one, if you can think of the Lion King or many of the ancient Greek mythologies, is called the hero's journey, where you start at the top, right? And you cast out of your home, you go on a journey, you learn things along the way, you have all sorts of mishaps, challenges, opportunities, conquer them, lose some, win some, and come back home a changed person, a conquering hero, however you want to. Or maybe you come back with your tail between your legs. But in any case, it's a circular storyline. Where you start from the beginning is where you end. There are I don't want to go into too many of these, but there are like 8 really common arcs.
The hero's journey, the dark moment.
Yeah, exactly. And, and another common one is called converging ideas, where you start out with an idea, and then you have another idea, and then another idea. And it's not quite clear to the reader exactly how they're linked, but it's leading somewhere, and then another idea, and eventually they converge to the final moment. And I'll just mention one more, which is spark lines. And that's one where you have compare and contrast. So you have a story where this is what I thought my reality was going to be, and this is what happened. I went for a hike in the woods thinking I'd have a glorious day, and instead I met a bear. I was hailed on. I lost my food. I lost, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So looking up, if you're writing a personal narrative and you don't quite know, you can't think automatically of a storyline that fits it, just look them up. Just look up, what are common story arcs? And there will be one, I guarantee it, that fits your content. And that then can help you write that final draft. And it's really good for focusing. It helps you figure out, oh, now that I'm doing this, that piece doesn't actually fit anymore, but this one piece really does. Like, it can make your writing job so much easier because you're creating a scaffolding, a structure on which to hang it.
We were talking about personal narratives in how it's manifesting in today's communication culture, internet, et cetera. You and I were talking about this beforehand. A lot of writers who used to work or still maybe currently do, excuse me, in the legacy media space, are starting to write for Substack, have Substack, or having the writing exist on a platform via subscription or otherwise. But this is kind of a new thing. And I think critical to these new platforms and different new ways that people are writing, doing reporting, doing cultural influency kind of things, is that the personal narrative is critical to their success for this, right? It's not just reporting on something. It's reporting. Heather Cox Richardson comes to mind. There are people in the financial and economic space, cultural space, politics, et cetera. Some others. You know what I'm talking about. What are you seeing here?
Absolutely. Like, this goes back to the idea that how much research shows that we remember stories rather than facts and figures, and that we relate to people if we think they're authentic. So if I'm writing articles about American history or about economics, how do I convince my audience that I know what I'm talking about, that I'm an expert who understands something? Using personal narrative is a way to connect to the audience, so that then when you go into the reason you're actually writing, your expertise, there's a connection there that can follow into them then believing what you write. And it's not just that they believe what you write, it's whether or not they believe it, it makes it more accessible because you're human and you have that level of authenticity. I think about my husband, and also the co-creator of the creative nonfiction class, if I'm being honest, is Dave Wolf, and he wrote a book, I think 15 years ago, some time ago, called Tales from the Underground. He's a soil scientist and an ecologist, all about what goes on under our feet. Not really the kind of book most people would be interested in, but he starts every chapter with a narrative, a personal narrative or a narrative. And by the time you read about this exciting narrative, you so much want to know about what's happening in the caves 2,000 miles under the earth, or what's happening in the bacteria beneath our feet. because he's made it alive with narrative. And you see that more and more today with everyone, whether it's an influencer or a scholar who's trying to write for a public audience, or some of the many people writing on Substack who are departing information and their expertise. They're doing it almost always or by establishing a personal brand, a narrative voice that people can relate to.
It's funny that we haven't really talked too much about AI quite yet.
Yeah.
I wanted to sort of save it at the end and not get bogged down throughout our conversation on it, but it's critical, it's huge, it's a part of what you and I do at this point. Do you have any perspective or advice, rather, in your experience that you can relate to our viewers and listeners today on how you can properly utilize AI in developing a personal narrative? You describe some of the pitfalls, right? You lose authenticity. Your story becomes less compelling, you become more average.
Mm-hmm.
Any ways that you use it that you think would be highly beneficial for this audience?
Yeah, I do use it. And two ways I use it, or is I do use it to help me copy edit, because believe it or not, I'm a terrible speller.
Okay.
Which I know, a profession in writing, and thank God for technology, because I never would have been a journalist without spell check. But so I use it to check grammar, make sure I've done a good job with a sentence, and so I use it to copy edit. I also use it if I'm going back in time, and say I'm writing about something that happened in 1971. I think I remember what happened in 1971. I might ask AI, what happened in 1971? What was the top song, or who was president, just to make sure I've remembered correctly, and what else was happening culturally?
Yep.
So that, because there may be a way that I feed some of that into the story. And it also helps me get in the mindset. So those are the ways in which I would use it. And also maybe to check a fact. If I write, my grandma came over from China in, September 19th, 1901, I might want to look and make sure, boats were going then, because that's my memory of the family story, right? So yeah, I use it to fact check. Quite often.
What about scenarios like this? I've tried it. I want to ask you what you think of it. Saying, okay, can you take a look at my document or this piece of writing that I've done? Can you check it against the Associated Press style guide, Chicago Manual of Style? Can you do that? Does that stuff?
Absolutely, I would do that if I was doing media writing, not personal narrative, because if it's AP style, it's going to give you the news voice.
Oh,
so which is great if you're writing a press release, an event announcement, or a media story.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't do it for the personal essay one, because you want your voice, yours to come through.
I guess I was thinking on the grammar, punctuation.
Oh yeah,
maybe.
Absolutely, on grammar and punctuation, I absolutely would use it.
Okay, we have a question from Monica, who asks, are there any words or phrases that you find particularly useful for connecting with the audience? Any that could be detrimental to connecting with an audience? Do you have any go-to moves, any signature moves that you, I mean, maybe you don't want to get into that business, but I thought it was a thought-provoking question,
Yeah, so personally, I mentioned alliterations. I love alliterations.
Okay.
So for people who don't know what alliterations are, probably most of you do, it's when you might have a series of words in a sentence that have a similar sound. So C's often make alliterations, it provides a cadence to a sentence. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I love alliterations. So anytime I see a place to put alliterations, I do, particularly at the start of a paragraph, because I think it pulls readers in, it pulls viewers. Readers and viewers are synonymous today, but it kind of it's catchy, it's rhythmic, it sounds a little bit more like a song. So that is a signature move. I do that a lot. The other thing is I love the word indeed, which I blush a little when I say that because it's such an old-fashioned word, but I use it a lot. I do actually have to go out and make sure I haven't used it too much. Like once is enough.
Yeah, you can tell AI to dial that back 60%, please.
I would go back to a question that somebody brought up, how, I use cliche too much, and that's relevant to this.
Yes.
Sometimes cliche can be super powerful because it reinforces that, cliches are universal thoughts, right? They're things that we share regardless of our culture, our politics, or where we were born, our socioeconomic status, that love is blind, right? That's a
Yes.
cliche we all know. If you have a story that reflects that or tells the opposite, you can use the cliche. I think, cliches get a bad rap. Of course, you don't want your whole piece to read like a cliche, but kind of sometimes working with cliches, throwing them on their head, adding a twist to them, or just reminding people that this is an example of them is not necessarily a bad thing. You just don't want 4 or 5 different kinds of cliche, in the same piece. Then it's like you'll get eye rolls.
Tons of good advice during this conversation. I was just thinking, not a lot of us undergo or put ourselves through continual education as it relates to writing, right? Some of us have learned how to do it long ago, either through remedial writing or that kind of stuff. It's not a continual educational endeavor for most of us. So for those of us, we've set the table with a lot of really, really good advice here. But for the people that do want to take it to the next level, for instance, let's talk about your narrative and creative writing for nonfiction certificate program. What can the writer then anticipate needing to learn about, or how would they benefit from taking the education to the next level and looking at your certificate program, for instance?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, whether it's the certificate program or not.
Yeah.
That writing is a skill. It's like being an athlete. It's like running a marathon. And, it's a skill I've been developing my entire life. And I still feel like I'm learning after, decades in this business. And anything where practice is the number one thing. Practice, practice, practice. But of course, it's like if you're running through a marathon, you could be running the wrong way, right? You could be running in a way that hurts your foot.
Inefficient.
And then you get a trainer who says, wait a minute, you got to do it this way.
Yes.
Or say you're a singer, you get help from professionals to improve your voice. So in addition to practice, I think anything where you can push your boundaries as a writer and learn to use something else is really good. Like I have had students in my in the Cornell class say, I can't figure out how to do alliteration, so after I wrote this piece, I asked AI to put a few alliterations in, and then they learn how to do it from that. That I had forgotten about that example. And then after that, the writer was able to figure out how to do it on their own. So, I mean, if you're learning from another human being, that's fantastic. There's so many. There's writers.com, there's narrative.com, there's magazines that take narrative writing. Huffington Post has a whole personal narrative section every day, personal stories, that's all they are. The New York Times, the love, what's it called? Love story section, everyone knows. Modern Love.
Modern Love, yeah.
I've had people get published in that after taking this course, and in other places too. So just practicing and learning as much as you can. If you think I'm not good at transitions, go online and look up about transitions, or take a course that includes learning about transitions, because we learn these things in high school usually if we had good writing teachers, but my gosh, by the time you're 5 years out of high school, you've forgotten them. Even if you're a professional writer, we all get stuck in our little patterns and ways of writing, and you want to break out of that by learning something new, like doing something new.
Speaking of breaking out, a lot of what we described, or what we've been talking about through this discussion, has us talking about it like it's a solitary endeavor, like you're alone. And let's just remember that you are not alone, and certainly being in a cohort within a class is useful. But can you talk a little bit about that? Having, who do you surround yourself with? How do you work on your craft with others?
Yeah, read,
Yeah.
and share what you read with others, because that helps. Read people that you think are good writers, and not just read what they wrote, but analyze their writing. What do you like about their writing? Do you like the way they interplayed fact with personal? Do you like the way they used really short sentences all the time? Do you like the way they broke up everything into 2 lines? Really analyze it and talk to other people about it. And anytime you write, ask someone to read it. Don't always take their advice, because, when I was writing that short story I told you about, the one on pain, I gave it to 3 people who are all great writers. I think they're great writers. And they all gave me different advice. So I just picked and choose the advice that I thought was the most useful. And I think that's something that all writers should do, is get other people's opinion. If you want an opinion, just like, does this story work? How does it go? Give it to someone who's not necessarily a writer. Like, would you be interested in this? Right? But if you have other people in your friends and family or professional circle that you think are good writers, even if it's not this particular genre, ask them to read it too and get their feedback.
Perfect. Audience, remember that you are never alone in this endeavor, and we certainly encourage you to learn as much as you can in the time that you have. Lauren Chambliss, speaking of time that we have, thanks for taking the time to come into the studio. It's been super fun talking to you today.
Thanks, Chris. I can't wait to read your next personal essay, because I know you're going to do it now.
I'll kick something over your way after this.
Thanks.
Thank you, audience. Thanks for joining. We'll see you on the next Keynote. Thank you so much.